The following is a fan summary, for entertainment purpose, only, which is not intended to replace the original series. We do not own the anime, music, artwork, or the lyrics, all rights reserved to their respective owners. This is for people's enjoyment only. This video is not meant to infringe any of the copyrights. L was confused, cleared his throat, and indicated that he didn't quite understand the situation he was in and felt somewhat uncomfortable. The old man snapped back to reality, realizing he was becoming intrusive and letting his emotions take over. Immediately, he released L, rubbed the back of his head with one hand, and apologized for his intrusive behavior. He explained that he acted that way because L's mana was so incredible. L listened calmly to the older man, but downplayed the situation by ignoring it. Although the initial touch between them was now over, the older man couldn't simply ignore the fact that L was so young. He told L that he had never seen such a young 7th-class mage. The older man had a sparkle in his eyes and made it clear to L that he was fascinated by what he had already achieved at such a young age. L felt visibly uncomfortable being praised like this and wondered what the heck was going on with the older man and why he was gushing so much. In the awkward situation, L looked around the older man's room and discovered piles of books scattered haphazardly on the floor, open and chaotically distributed. As he examined the books more closely, he recognized that they were mainly about magic. He had to recall how, as a child, he had devoured every magical book. It took a while, but then the older man apologized again for his rude behavior. After the second apology, he mentioned that His Majesty, the king, was already waiting for L, and he would like to lead him to him. Additionally, he modestly asked if they could talk about magic on the way. L had a gleam in his eyes, thrilled that there was another person besides him who had a passion for magic. As L set off with the older man to visit the king, he demonstrated some of his magic by channeling a blue, hot mana flame in his hand. The older man was beside himself when he saw L's demonstration. He couldn't believe that someone so young could channel powerful magic in their hand without any preparation or recitation of a spell. He told L that he was on a whole different level than the other 7th-class mages. As the two continued along the corridors of the king's castle, the older man pondered how this was possible and came up with many wild theories that made L smile. As they walked along the corridor, L smiled more and more. He enjoyed talking to the older man, and he had a lot of fun having this conversation. This was because the older man's passion was the same as L's, exploring and examining magic. Suddenly, L's eyes widened. He looked out of one of the windows of the palace and gazed down at the harbor. He had a beautiful view of the city. The water rustled, the waves were breaking at the harbor, the sun was shining, and a peaceful atmosphere settled over the entire city. L could see more precisely that this land was rich in food, the underground full of resources and treasures. While L looked out the window, contemplating the advantages of the Tolian kingdom and feeling the heat of the place, the older man pondered and mumbled again in front of L. This made L wonder why the older man was contemplating once again. To end the pondering, L handed the older man a small piece of paper with a magical theory he had concocted and put on paper while passing through the corridors of the castle. He explained to the older man that there were many similarities between the fields of magic and calculations. The older man eagerly and energetically took the piece of paper from L. Clearly excited, he examined the theory and was surprised that such a method even existed. He praised L again, expressing how valuable this was. He also mentioned that the method was actually quite simple but resulted in a coherent theory. As they continued their walk through the castle corridors, L explained that he didn't originally intend to make this theory public, but he wanted to show it to the older man because he liked him. However, L also made it clear by placing his index finger in front of his mouth that he should keep this theory a secret. The older, pinkish man thanked L for this. While L and the older man took their time and leisurely approached the king, he waited alone in a large room at a table. He supported his face with one hand while impatiently tapping the table with the other. The king said that Desalin, the pinkish older gentleman, was late again and wondered if he had been distracted by magic once more. Just as he spoke, a voice outside the door informed the king that his guest, El, was now here. The king immediately ordered to let him in, and Desalin opened the door, letting El into the room. El apologized very politely for his late arrival. The king happily stood up and was about to greet El when Desalin stepped in front of El and informed the king that El was the mage who would change the course of history. The king ordered Desalin to calm down and explained to him that he had also seen the greatness and strength of Sir El yesterday. He then asked Desalin to leave him and El alone. Desalin was somewhat surprised by this. However, aware of his position, Desalin apologized to his king and left him and El alone. El was a bit confused about why the king wanted to speak alone with him, and he now realized that he hadn't seen a single knight on the way to this room, and there was no knight present in this room either. El wondered if the king had done this intentionally so that he wouldn't feel too uncomfortable. When Desalin left the room, El thanked him for guiding him so well to his king and for the pleasant conversations on the way here. Desalin requested, in conclusion, that they should meet again, as he wanted to learn more about El's discoveries in magic. With a big please and a smile on his face, he bid farewell and closed the door behind him. Okay, people, please write in the comments how cute Desalin is, please, haha, real sweet boy. The king found his wizard's behavior somewhat embarrassing and shook his head slightly and shamefully. When the two were alone in the room, El knelt down, bowed, and greeted the king with the utmost respect and as much courtesy as possible. However, before El could express his gratitude from the depths of his heart, the king touched El on the shoulder and addressed him as Sir before his name. While the king also knelt on both knees in front of El, he told him to please stand up and that he should be the one to express thanks. He repeated El's words verbatim and thanked him sincerely for saving him from danger yesterday. After this gratitude, the king clapped his hands a few times, after which servants and maids brought delicious food into the room. The king apologized for it possibly being a bit impolite, but the food would be served all at once. There were ribs, lobster, various types of fish and sauces, as well as other tasty dishes. Then the king said that El should please feel at ease, and they could talk freely. El smiled and realized that King Lidolf seemed to be a very considerate person, even about the smallest things. As they were eating, Lidolf subsequently asked El if he wanted some alcohol and explained that he had specifically prepared something from the most popular alcohol in his kingdom. El naturally agreed and held out a glass to the king, thanking him afterward. Since El recognized that the king treated him well, he wanted to be equally respectful and polite to him as the king was to him. This included treating the king with a lot of respect and speaking his mind freely. Without much hesitation, El directly told the king to his face that he believed he wanted him to build a magic tower in this land. At first, King Lidolf was astonished, and his face showed some shock. However, it didn't take long for the shocked expression to turn into a serious one, and he confirmed El's assumption. The king explained, though, that the tower was not just about consolidating his power but about protecting themselves from the monsters and their annual attacks, during which thousands up to 10,000 civilians lose their lives. The king also said that this was the main reason why he had asked El to visit him in his castle. Even though it was embarrassing, King Lidolf continued and explained to El the situation, that the kingdom was divided into 3 parts. He explained that the first and second princes had joined forces and collectively had more than half of the kingdom on their side. King Lidolf added that it wouldn't surprise him if there was an internal conflict within his kingdom at any moment. However, as the 2 princes were doing everything they could to secure their forces, the monsters in the west could rampage freely without drawing attention to the units. Lidolf also said that he would like to have a good kingdom where his subjects could live in peace and be protected. To achieve this, they would need to hunt down and eliminate the nearby monsters. Additionally, Lidolf explained to El that a magic tower could help prevent future wars with other nations. Lastly, Lidolf also expressed his desire for the 3rd prince to take over as king, believing him to be a very warm and kind-hearted man. So, Lidolf pleaded with El to please settle in his kingdom, emphasizing that his subjects deserved this happiness. He practically begged him. El was surprised and amazed at how serious the king was about it. He realized that the king's eyes, as he pleaded, were full of determination, and the king's request was not aimed at gaining a personal advantage. Instead, it was focused on wanting the best for his subjects. El had a slight grin on his face. He was happy that he had made the right choice and that the king, in whose land he wanted to settle, was such a kind-hearted person. King Lidolf explained that he agreed with El and that he would do his best to help the Tolian kingdom. Lidolf thanked El for that and told him that he would also do everything to support him in creating a magic tower. However, El also stated that he had some conditions that needed to be met for him to help. One of them was that he needed 3 years to make the necessary preparations. Upon hearing this, Lidolf called out silently. He was surprised that 3 years would be needed and then added that they didn't have so much time. Lidolf explained to El that the territory of Count Luvius, one of the destroyed areas, would not survive another 3 years. El's expression changed, he seemed somewhat surprised, and the smile that was on his lips disappeared. King Lidolf further explained that they had enjoyed years of peace, thanks to an excellent magician. He continued that recently, some people had kidnapped this magician, and since then, the monsters had been steadily advancing into the territory of the Count, causing civilian losses to escalate. El suddenly widened his eyes upon hearing that someone had kidnapped a magician. He immediately thought that this might be the responsibility of the Marquis. King Lidolf went on to say that currently, Countess Rowland Luvius was managing things as skillfully as the former Count. He explained that she was the daughter of the former Count and a genius with the sword and in territorial administration matters, but with a heavy heart, Lidolf also said that the monsters could completely destroy the area if they couldn't be stopped, and that would mean the end of the Luvius family. Unfortunately, El had to inform the king that he would have to stick to these 3 years because that was the time he needed to build a magical tower. However, as he stabbed into the juicy, well-cooked steak, he explained to the king with a smile that he would take care of things in the Manticore Gorge. Lidolf repeated El's words in disbelief, asking if he meant the Manticore Gorge, the land of death, and if it was really possible to deal with things there. El explained that it was possible and that he would need the 3 years to handle things in the Manticore Gorge. At the same time, El also asked how many raids there were exactly each year. Lidolf explained to him that there were 10,000 raids every year affecting his kingdom. In total, there should be about 15,000 manticores inhabiting the area in the gorge. El folded his hands in front of his face and thought out loud. He realized that 15,000 manticores would be a very large number that would require time and attention. In disbelief, King Lidolf, with wide-open eyes, asked El if it was really possible to free and save his kingdom from the Manticore Gorge and its monsters. El told him that he must have forgotten that he was a 7th-level magician. Additionally, El explained to the king with a smile on his face that he also had the trump card of a night golem. Astonished, King Lidolf remembered that El was right and that he had almost forgotten, due to El's young age, that he was a 7th-level magician and that he also had a night golem accompanying him. As he looked at El's face again and saw the confidence and determination in his eyes, he knew that nothing was impossible for this young man. Lidolf once again pleaded with El to restore peace to the kingdom. El replied that he looked forward to the future with joyful anticipation and was excited to settle here. Then El stood up and apologized. King Lidolf asked El if he intended to leave now. El confirmed this with a grin on his face and said that he now knew what he had to do. He then thanked the king for the invitation and made his way to the door. Before he could leave, King Lidolf told him that he was welcome to visit him anytime and that he could come whenever it suited him. He also asked him how old he was exactly. El answered the king's question by revealing his age of 17 and left. The king, who now had a smile on his face again, was impressed with El. He had to acknowledge that El, at the age of 17, was already very extraordinary and great. At the same time, he wondered if El would really be able to save his people from the Manticore Gorge. The Manticore Gorge was a canyon between 2 mountains, through which a small blue river flowed. In this forest and the gorge, approximately 15,000 manticores lived. Manticores were large, lion-like predatory cats with wings on their backs and a scorpion tail, usually having few enemies. However, in this place, there were beings that they held great respect for, and it was not uncommon for the smaller manticores to occasionally retract their tails when encountering a specimen of their kind twice their size. These specimens had particularly sharp and large teeth and were monstrously strong. This was a manticore king, recognizable by a red jewel on its forehead, granting it authority over all other manticores. The power of this manticore king was comparable to that of 100 normal manticores and even stronger than 100 at the expert level. It was entirely normal that during a manticore attack, villages simply vanished as if they had never existed. And right now, one of the villages was about to experience such a fate. This village was the small village of Ken. This small village lay on the right side between the two mountains in the forest crossed by the river. It was a small village surrounded by a small wooden wall. At the entrance and exit of the village, two watchtowers were positioned, protecting the village from attackers. To enter the village at all, one had to cross a small narrow bridge. This bridge was currently under attack by two manticores, and the villagers were desperately trying to defend themselves and fend them off. One of the villagers asked his comrade how they were supposed to stop two manticores at the same time. They needed all the men they had just for one. Despair was written all over the soldiers' faces. Nevertheless, another soldier shouted to his comrades that they must not let the manticores into the village under any circumstances. He stomped his right leg on the ground, unleashing a large shockwave. Confidently, he told his comrades that anyone who could and wanted to fight was welcome to join him in the fight. His comrades then gained new courage, and they had expected nothing less from their captain, Miter. They were also impressed by his aura. They had to acknowledge what a talented swordsman their captain was and that he had already achieved a high rank in his late 20s. In the middle of the bridge, Captain Miter fought against a manticore slowly approaching. The aura of the manticore was dark and full of bloodthirsty energy. Miter's aura, on the other hand, was green and gentle, swirling around him. Suddenly, the manticore roared, showing its teeth to the brave soldiers. Captain Miter was not impressed, jumped into the air, and immediately attacked the manticore with his weapon. With full force, he hit the manticore's forehead with his weapon, giving it a headbutt. Unfazed by his own direct hit, Captain Miter immediately ordered his men to attack the manticore before it could recover. All the soldiers on the bridge drew their bows and prepared for the assault. Without wasting any time, they shot arrows at the manticore that had previously paralyzed Captain Miter, hitting it all over its body. Standing before the corpse of the manticore, Captain Miter was sure that even such a monster wouldn't have survived such an attack. He then wanted to make sure to defeat the manticore with a final blow. He attacked the head of the second manticore with his lance, causing it to scream and fall to the ground. Captain Miter was sure that the first wave of manticore attacks was now over. Captain Miter was all the more surprised when he saw that behind the first two manticores, another one was hiding, roaring with an open mouth, and rushing towards him with two sharp horns. Captain Miter realized that more and more manticores would come one after another. He turned to his comrades and soldiers, alerting them that another manticore had arrived, and they had to fend off the attack together once again. However, as he looked at the troop, he noticed that his soldiers were visibly exhausted and needed a break. Captain Miter became somewhat puzzled because he had never seen such a large manticore alone in his life, let alone defeated one. It dawned on him that it would likely be too challenging to fend off the attack using only villagers as soldiers. Nevertheless, he didn't give up, and his grip tightened around his weapon. He realized that, despite the disadvantage, they had to repel the attack. Then he assumed his fighting stance and waited for the manticore to approach. It ran toward Miter with fire in its mouth. Both opponents faced each other, preparing for the first strike, Captain Miter with his spear and the manticore with fire in its mouth. The manticore was the first to launch a fireball at Captain Miter. Subsequently, Captain Miter rushed towards the manticore. When the two attacks collided, there was a loud explosion. The villagers held their hands in front of their bodies to fend off the immense shockwave. The villagers were also eager to see how the battle between the two would turn out. As the fire and smoke slowly cleared, the silhouette of Captain Miter could be seen. He leaned on his weapon and knelt down. Completely out of breath, he wondered, as his gaze fell on the manticore in front of them, how it was possible to come out unscathed from such an attack. In doing so, he looked directly into the deep red eyes of the large predatory cat. Completely exhausted, he continued to support himself on his own weapon and faced his fate. While the manticore attacked Captain Miter again, he wondered if this was now his end. However, with a single stroke, the manticore was split into four and defeated, causing the manticore to fall to the ground in front of Captain Miter. Captain Miter and the villagers were astonished, wondering who could effortlessly defeat such a beast. While the unbelievers looked at the corpse of the manticore, a person emerged from the water, wearing a red robe and red gloves. It was Kana, who, right after defeating the manticore, informed Elle that she had successfully completed her mission. She stood impressively in front of Captain Miter and the villagers, who examined her closely. They were surprised that their savior was a girl who didn't even look like she had reached the age of 20. At first glance, they also recognized that this girl was extremely talented in handling a sword. Elle, who followed Kana, congratulated her on the successfully completed job and told her that they would definitely need to find a new master in the future. These praising words were too much for Kana, who then turned red. Embarrassed, she said that this task had not been difficult for her but was still shy and thanked Elle for his kind words. After Kana sorted out her thoughts and processed her brother's words of praise, Elle turned to Captain Miter and the villagers, greeting them. They were still astonished and couldn't yet realize what was happening right before their eyes. Elle explained to them that they had not come to harm them. But rather, he introduced himself as the magician who wants to provide them all with a pleasant life and will soon rule the land. Elle had a cheerful smile on his face and tried to convey the message as kindly as possible. However, this news shocked Captain Miter, who then tightened the grip on his weapon, trembling, and asked what Elle meant by that. Completely frightened, he straightened up, aimed the weapon at Elle, and asked why this land should soon belong to him. Kana also reached for Miter's weapon and asked how he dared to point his sword at her brother. She channeled her entire red aura expressing her anger at this act. She asked Captain Miter how he could be so rude to Elle and yelled at him. Miter was quite astonished, swallowed, and had to consider the impressive, incredibly dense aura unfolding before him. He also had to admit that, although his opponent seemed to be young, her spirit and determination were amazing. Suddenly, Elle shouted from behind Kana to stop and touched her on the shoulder to pull her out of her anger and rage. Elle explained to her that they were outsiders, and it was entirely normal for the villagers to react that way from their perspective. Kana turned around, looked Elle in the face, and let the matter rest. She turned to Captain Miter and gave him a final warning to please mind his manners in the future. Then Elle turned to the villagers and said that he probably hadn't communicated it correctly. He explained to the villagers that he planned to build his magical tower here after driving away all the manticores from the surroundings. The villagers on the bridge whispered to each other and couldn't believe what they were hearing. It was clear to them that Elle's plan was to build a magical tower here, and he must be a 7th-level magician who would then protect this place. Some wanted to believe this, while others questioned this intention. Captain Miter didn't hesitate to ask Elle directly what would happen to them according to his plans. Elle immediately recognized that the person in front of him must be the leader of this village. He explained to Captain Miter that they should just live as they have been. This surprised Captain Miter, and he widened his eyes, visibly astonished by the words coming from Elle's mouth. Elle further explained to Captain Miter and the villagers that he planned to rid the entire land around them of the manticores, and this should mean that their village could continue to expand and use more land without the risk of being attacked. He also explained that he did not want to be an evil ruler and would by no means increase taxes but mostly intended to leave everything as it was. Additionally, El explained his wishes, which aligned with the king's wishes, a happy life for everyone. Captain Miter couldn't believe what he heard. His eyes widened, his mouth hung open as he had to first comprehend what El had just said. The remaining villagers on the bridge were also stunned, trying to process what they were hearing from El. Suddenly, another massive paw stomped on the ground, and another manticore became visible behind El. El recognized this immediately and turned around. Quickly, he formed a magical circle beneath him and called out to the villagers to stay calm. Behind him, another portal opened to a different dimension, from which 3 large iron golems emerged. They stood impressively behind El, who became serious, and ordered his golems to take care of the villagers' problem. A slit in one of the golems' helmets opened, and El realized that the command was accepted. Immediately, the iron golem rushed toward the manticore. Tiny in comparison, raised its right hand, and crushed the small creature. As if Captain Miter hadn't been astonished enough, he was left speechless watching El manipulate the manticore. His gaze straight ahead, the iron golem executed El's command, kneeling before its master and awaiting further instructions. With a smile, El turned to the captain and asked if he would now trust him. The surprised expression on Captain Miter's face changed. As the leader of the village, he couldn't make hasty decisions and had to be guided by his feelings. He recognized that their safety was guaranteed with such golems around them. Moreover, he saw in El an extremely powerful magician and trusted that he could make the Manticore Gorge a place where people could live again. He placed his hand over his chest and apologized to El. El extended his hand to Captain Miter and said that his behavior only proved that he was a good leader, and there was no shame in expecting something suspicious when meeting someone for the first time. Captain Miter thanked him for the kind words and shook hands. However, Captain Miter became serious again and said that they needed to quickly go to the other side of the small village to defend against the other manticores. Smiling, El reassured him that there was no need to worry and that the fear was unfounded. While El and Kana took care of this side, El's mother and his other sister Serna, with El's golden golem knight Tana, took care of the manticores on the other side of the village. El's mother and Serna were repeatedly amazed at how strong Tana was and widened their eyes as they witnessed the spectacle of Tana defeating the manticores. At the end of the battle, Tana basked in the sunlight. El asked Captain Miter if he could gather the representatives of the village so that he could announce his plans. Several hours passed until our group and the villagers found themselves in a building at a table in the middle of the village. As El looked around, he was somewhat surprised. He had expected several old village leaders to come, but most of those speaking for the village were young men, all with large, well-trained muscles. On closer inspection, El realized that they all had the same aura temperature. He wondered if there was a specific reason for this. After forming his initial impression, El stood up and warmly greeted everyone. He introduced himself by name and wasted no time in getting straight to his observations. He asked the villagers if they had all learned the same sword technique, citing the almost identical aura and a strength that could not come from the regular training of ordinary villagers. The villagers and Captain Miter were immediately taken aback by El's speech. El also inquired about what such talented individuals were doing in a place like this. Captain Miter thought for a moment and looked at the ground. Then he turned his gaze back to El and explained that he actually expected nothing less from him. El couldn't easily be kept in the dark or fooled. He also praised El's keen eyes and explained that they were actually knights of Baron Jaimier, the same Baron Jaimier known for his sword technique, who became a swordmaster at the age of 30. Captain Miter continued, visibly distressed and saddened, with his head lowered. As the battle for the crown intensified, there were many attempts to sway the Baron to their side. El's mother looked at the concerned village leader with a mother's love. She could see in his eyes that this topic was not easy for him, and the pain still ran deep. Captain Miter continued to explain that despite all efforts to win the Baron to their side, they failed because he turned down all offers. The real trouble began when the season arrived for the land to be attacked by monsters, and no one was willing to help the poor Baron. El and his mother listened attentively to Captain Mider's story, with the narration particularly affecting El's mother. Mider went on to report that the Baron fought alongside 5,000 soldiers, but it was not enough and led to the annihilation of his entire family. With tears in his eyes, Captain Mider recounted that at that time, they were knights on probation, and the Baron told them to flee and survive. The other villagers at the table also had tears in their eyes and continued their captain's story. They added that after fleeing, they did not want to go to the aristocrats who had abandoned their beloved Baron. That was why they settled in this place. El's mother continued to listen to the story, becoming sadder as she witnessed the soldiers' heavy fate. El, on the other hand, listened attentively to the story but was not as deeply moved as his mother. He knew exactly how the soldiers must have felt, but he did not understand why they did not simply travel to another land. With their skills as knights, they should have been able to obtain the title of a knight and not expose their family to such a dangerous situation. However, as El pondered this, he knew that he had to reconsider his own thoughts. He realized that every person had their own ideals and that the circumstances in which these people lived were different from his own. He looked down at his hands and became aware that he needed to solve their situation first to understand their mindset and the differences. He looked at the representatives again and explained to them that it was easy for him to deal with the monsters, and that was not the main problem. Furthermore, he looked at his sisters and then back at Captain Mider, continuing his explanation of his plans. He explained that his first goal was to address the leaders of the manticores due to their dense population. This surprised the villagers, who couldn't believe what they had just heard. El continued, stating that once he had everything organized, he wanted the villagers to help him. Captain Mider was equally astonished by El's plan and asked him if it was even possible to defeat the Manticore King. El, full of confidence, spoke to the villagers and assured them that he would keep his word and show them how to defeat such a beast twice the size of the normal version, with a red jewel on its forehead, wings, and a scorpion tail.